Good morning. This is Kenneth and Bailey here with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you a quick rundown of what went down last night during the Committee of the Whole meeting for Minneapolis Public Schools. Bailey, how are you doing today?
I am good, thank you. How are you doing, especially after yesterday's Timberwolves game?
Yeah, it was a good game. Good game, tough loss, but a lot of fun. And we go on to game 6, so that's all right. But as you can see, Heather is not with us today because she had some well-deserved time off. So Bailey's stepping in. Thanks for stepping in, Bailey. So with that, do you want to give us a rundown of last night's board meeting?
Yes, for sure. So as Kenneth said, last night was a committee of the whole meeting. So with committee of the whole, or COW, I guess for short, if you want to go with that, they basically just do presentations, take Q&A, have discussions. There's no voting or anything like that. So it's just a really good time to kind of get into the weeds a little bit more and understand kind of maybe what goes on behind the scenes to how a school district runs. So I know I appreciate these meetings and I always learn lots of good info. So the main focus of last night's meeting was focusing on some capital improvement projects. And we heard a really outstanding presentation from Senior Officer DeVette, as well as Executive Director of Capital Planning, Kurt Hartog. And basically we learned about, oh my gosh, so many things. We learned about where some capital improvement projects are at, which ones are on time, which ones are not on time, and why they're not on time. And we also kind of had a somewhat of a tougher conversation about some school buildings that we're not using, and if we need to sell them, if we need to use them at some point, and how they're being used now and why. And so there's also been some conversation as well as like, why can't we use this, sell this building and use money for certain things, or, use it for staff or whatever conversation that may be. And so I thought it was really helpful to kind of discuss that, how the funding works across the district. And so I think something that has been unclear to me in the past that makes a lot more sense now is that there's essentially two buckets of money that fund schools. And one is for capital improvement projects, such as, what we talked about last night. And one is general funding. And so as it, basically as it sounds, capital focuses on buildings and making sure they're up to par for what, students, teachers, and staff need to run a school building. And then the general fund is basically everything else. So making sure that educators get paid, and that's funded by the state general education formula. And so keeping that in mind with these capital improvement projects is important, just because funds in those two they can't be switched. They basically have to stay in their lane. And there's a lot of reasons for that we won't go into today. But again, something good to keep in mind, because a lot of these decisions have been kicked down the road for many years. So it's kind of been building up over time. And that's why maybe these conversations and discussions seem perhaps bigger than they could have been in previous years. And something else about the capital improvement projects is, again, talking about potentially closing or selling schools, or school buildings, I should say.
That are currently unoccupied.
Yes, thank you. Sometimes they're being used for storage. Sometimes they're totally empty. It kind of depends across the board. But there's some really great historical context in this meeting where in the last 100 years in MPS, they've actually closed or sold off about 90 buildings. And within one decade, between 1972 and 1984, they actually did that for 45 buildings. So this conversation isn't new. It's not the first time we've had it, but it is the first time in a couple of years where it's kind of been at the forefront. And so another big highlight of the meeting is that there's some really big investments happening at the Northside schools that Kenneth will share a little bit about later. And another big piece of news from capital planning is that they're recommending to sell Tuttle, Gordon, and Willard.
Yeah, so it was again a quick meeting last night, but packed with a lot of information, and a lot of, yeah, just I think things that are important for communities, like, what is the status of my school building? What is the status of any improvement projects? And so I wanted to share as a part of our slides of the night, just this really important update around some of the capital planning and some of the projects that are on track to start or continue on through this summer. And so, North High's improvement plan around and adding the CTE center, that's starting this summer. Some of the changes at Anderson is going to be getting started this summer. An observatory at Hall, the Black Box Theater at Marcy, and the Arts Theater at Bethune. Um, the robotics labs, changes in entrances, lighting, furniture, and equipment. Like, these are all things that are still taking place this summer at various schools across the district. So I think that's really exciting, right? And we've had a lot of conversations around what is going on in the district. Um, and I think it's important to remember that there are positive things happening. So I thought this was an important thing to highlight from yesterday's meeting. Um, but then looking at some of the projects that are delayed, because there are some delays in projects, we have, several projects that, were planned to get started this summer, but just because of some of the things that they've discovered as they've started doing some research around those projects, or really a lot of supply chain issues or contractor availability is what was shared yesterday. Some of these projects have been changed or delayed, including changes to some entrances, ventilation changes, lunchroom updates, kitchen flooring and lighting updates. And so, again, just something to keep track of, things that you might have expected to get started, projects that you might have expected to get started this summer, just may not be getting underway. Some things that you're expecting to take place over the course of the next year might just the scope of the project might be shifting. So things to just keep in mind for sure. So those are my slides of the night. And so with that, let's go into our do better moment. So Bailey, do you want to share your do better moment first?
Yeah, for sure. So my do better moment is that 13 schools currently do not have air conditioning in the district. And that's out of about like 69, 70 buildings. So a pretty significant amount, especially considering that the school year got extended. And so students are going to be in the buildings, until June. And at this rate, it's not super nice out, but I'm sure by then it'll start to get pretty hot, which, makes it in turn pretty tough to learn. Um,
Yeah. And while this year has been extended obviously until late June, even the calendar that was just approved by the school board over a few months ago also has them extending out further into June to build in more professional development days for staff. And so this is not just a 1 year thing that we're going to be dealing with. There are going to be school years in the future that go just a few days later into June than normal. And so this is a capital improvement priority that needs to be figured out soon, because we know our buildings get super hot in the summer. So yeah, sorry to cut you off there.
no, it's all good.
Um, so for my do better moment is really focused around the question that student representative Wesson asked last night around gender neutral bathrooms. And while last night's presentation was very comprehensive, very informative, and overall positive, I did feel like there wasn't a real answer to a plan around how do we have more gender neutral bathrooms within the district, or across the district. And I think that's, again, a huge issue of inclusivity. It's been something that students have been asking for a while. And the response was like, we need to still do like a study, plans, whatever. So it feels like it's still not something that has risen to the top of the priority list for the district. I'm not saying that the current top priorities are bad, but like we do need to figure this out as well. And it isn't something that has already it doesn't feel like there's been a ton of action around that question yet. So I really respect and appreciate that Student Representative Weston asked the question. I thought the improved response could have been like that. There has been more action taken. So that's my do better moment. Bailey, do you want to do your most valuable moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So my most valuable moment for me was the Capitol presentation as a whole. Again, it was done by Senior Officer DeVette and the ED of Capital Planning, Kurt Hartog. And of all of the meetings I've been to, I found this one to be the one where I walked away being like, I understand totally what is going on. I don't have to do any more digging to find out more information or anything like that. And so kudos to the folks who prepared and presented that information. And one thing I really wanted to highlight was the historical context that was provided, and kind of saying like, here's what happened in the last 100 years. Here's what happened about 40 years ago. Here's why. And then along with that, just the questions from school board members, I thought were really thoughtful. They clearly did some work, outside of the meeting, getting some critical questions from their constituencies and bringing those back in to ask of the presenters. And again, to me, I feel like if this was your first school board meeting ever, you could come in and understand the context, where things have been, where we're going. And so I hope to see that in future presentations as well, especially when it relates to like academics and more learning pieces like that. But yeah, how about you, Kenneth? What was your MVP moment?
So my most valuable moment was hearing that the projects at Bethune, Hall, and North High are getting underway. This is very exciting. I've already seen a picture floating around online about breaking ground at Bethune. And so I'm just really excited about that. And I think that it does serve as a really important investment in North Minneapolis. I know I've seen some discourse happening online and on social media just around why are we investing in an observatory when, schools don't have air conditioning, or, people being confused about the difference between our capital budget and our capital funding versus general fund. And, I would just broach the question, right? Like, were those questions asked when we decided to build on additions at Southwest or at Washburn, right? Like all of a sudden, when we're adding an observatory at Hall, now a lot of people got a lot of things to say about what we should be spending money on. But that wasn't a controversy that I at least remember when we were making additions at Southwest or at Washburn. And so let's just be careful about what we're advocating for and what we're saying and thinking about, and why we think that it's a ridiculous thing that North High should have, or North Minneapolis should have, an observatory, or that's, there should be a CTE center and building upgrades at North High, or a beautiful theater at Bethune. So I'm really excited about it. I thought some of the picture renderings that we saw were cool. I know there's, definitely more work to be done in making sure that the community's bought in and they're, really understands the benefit of these parts of the capital improvements at these schools, especially as some of these are multi-year improvements, and they will be disruptive to some learning. But overall, seeing some of these building improvements is really exciting. So that is my most valuable moment. And so with that, we will end this recap. Thank you all for listening. And Bailey, thank you for stepping in for Heather on this. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Well, take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.